It was love that destroyed us, not hatred. Hatred is predictable, but love, it decomposes, layer by layer, until only the bare framework of betrayal remains. If you're here to hear the truth, the one I've never said aloud, stay. Subscribe. Because I have no intention of repeating it. The rain in Seattle is never a downpour. It's a presence. It doesn't stop, it settles in. It had settled in that morning, a thick, pearl gray curtain that erased the Puget Sound skyline from my 40th floor penthouse. I loved the emptiness. I loved the way the cold glass of the window reflected my own face, unvarnished, unmasked. A man of 62, exhausted by the silence that had followed the phone call. The phone call that announced Henry, my son, was nothing more than a still silhouette in crumpled sheet metal. Grief takes different forms in men my age. In me, it took the form of obsessive precision. Every book on the shelf, every bank statement, every piece of my legacy, the Vance family foundation, built on silicon and solitude, had to be perfect, untouchable, because Henry had left only one thing that still mattered: Oliver. Oliver, 5 years old, with his father's storm-colored eyes and a laugh I was desperately trying to preserve in the rarefied air of our morning. He was my only anchor, the proof that the Vance lineage wasn't just a mausoleum of silver and regret. And then there was Ivy. Ivy, the widow, my daughter-in-law. She slipped into my life like a cold knife into silk. Elegant, always dressed in impeccable black, the expensive perfume that preceded and followed her. I never liked her smile. Too quick, too polite. There was always a calculation behind her pleasantries, an inventory. Since Henry's death, Ivy had turned the family home into a theater of her own suffering, but it was a very photogenic suffering. More importantly, she had taken complete control of Oliver. She had changed his school, reduced my visits to scheduled slots, and, slowly, made it feel like I was an old man disturbed by the echoes of the past. The turning point came 4 months ago. I uncovered her secret, not by chance, but by my own obsession. I have friends in dark places, people who know how to read beyond the balance sheets. Ivy did not have the money she claimed to have. She had only debts, a pharaonic lifestyle, and a plan. To inherit my control over the Vance fortune via Oliver. She needed the money to pay her creditors before they exposed her past. She had already sold the engagement ring Henry had given her, the one that belonged to my mother. I found it, anonymously, at a Chicago jeweler. A symbolic object, stolen. This discovery did not ignite my anger. It chilled it. I started planning. Not a quarrel, not melodrama. A clean, surgical execution. A revenge so elegant that she would only understand it once the lights were out. I spent weeks rewriting my will. I left Ivy a modest sum, consistent with what Henry would have wanted for his son's mother, but derisory compared to the bulk of my fortune. The rest, the millions, the assets, the company shares, would be transferred to the Willowbrook Foundation. The Willowbrook Foundation was the work of Eleanor. Eleanor, Henry's first wife. The one he truly loved, the one he divorced under family pressure, but never forgot. Eleanor ran a small medical research foundation, underfunded, but full of hope. It was the kind of cause my son would have championed. By leaving everything to Eleanor, I wasn't rewarding an ex-wife. I was honoring my son's memory, where Ivy had only seen a revenue stream. The idea of the pen and ink came later. I am a collector of rare objects. I appreciate the art of subtle falsification. I contacted an old chemist, a man I knew from my startup years. He created a special formula for me, a colorless, oxidation-based ink that would turn dark blue under slight pressure, like standard gel ink. but whose pigments, sensitive to intense UV light or localized heat, would disappear without a trace within a few hours. It was the Ink of Oblivion. I needed 2 documents that looked exactly the same. My lawyer, an old-school man, never suspected a thing. He prepared the official new will, duly notarized and witnessed, which gave it its legal force. I kept the original in my safe. I had a second document printed, a carbon copy of the first will, on paper of identical thickness and texture. This was my decoy, but the real plan revolved around Oliver's custody document. Ivy came with her own lawyer, an icy creature named Beatrice. They demanded a meeting here, in my living room, facing the wet Seattle horizon. They wanted me to sign an official custody relinquishment form, releasing me from all legal oversight regarding decisions about Oliver, except for visits. In exchange, they agreed to let me see him more often, a concession they offered, like throwing a crumb. On the D-Day, I was calm. The fatigue had transformed into a strange serenity. I had prepared the dining room table, dark mahogany. Ivy wore a cream suit that contrasted with the gray of the day. She was radiant, looking like a woman who knew she was about to win. "Samuel," she said, her voice a soft, almost filial melody. "This is for Oliver. He needs stability, and we need to know you are comfortable with this transition." I smiled, a smile that came from far away, the smile of a man who had already seen the final act of a play. "Of course, Ivy. Stability is all that matters." My heart was beating, not fast, but heavily, like a pendulum in an antique clock. On the table, the documents were lined up. 1. Oliver's custody relinquishment, the document they wanted me to sign for Ivy. 2. The decoy will, the document I would use as a visual bait. 3. The official will, the real document, sealed in the safe. I took out the pen. Not just any pen, a heavy silver fountain pen engraved with Henry's initials. I had filled it with the special ink. "I've always preferred writing with Henry's pen," I said, a slight melancholy in my voice. I saw Ivy soften. She took this for sentimentality, for weakness. She could not have been more wrong. Beatrice, the lawyer, pointed to the first document. "The relinquishment, Mr. Vance. Sign here, next to your name." I put the pen down. I inhaled Ivy's perfume. Gardenia, I believe. A scent that smelled of wealth without history. I picked up the document. It was the decoy, the carbon copy of the will I had prepared. I slid it away, discreetly, while I reached for a glass of water. Ivy was too busy admiring her manicure to notice the shift of paper. "Wait," I said, placing the custody relinquishment document back on the pile. "I apologize. My eyes are playing tricks on me. I'm sure you need this paperwork for the administration." I pointed to the document I had slid into view. This was the custody relinquishment. "I'll sign this one first. It's the most important, isn't it? My grandson's custody." Beatrice nodded, her stony expression unchanged. Ivy, meanwhile, had a look of barely concealed triumph. I took Henry's pen. I felt the cold weight of the silver in my hand. I signed, slowly, with excessive pressure. The ink traced a legible, permanent-looking Samuel Vance. I looked at Ivy. I felt her relief. "There. It is done." Ivy took the signed document, the custody relinquishment document. She carefully folded it and slipped it into her leather clutch, her small victory. She didn't even bother to read it again. She had the signature. Next, she pushed the other document toward me, the will I had prepared, the decoy, the carbon copy. "And to close the discussion on the inheritance, we have prepared this document, Mr. Vance. It ensures Oliver will be the sole heir, as you promised Henry." She lied with disconcerting ease. Henry had never promised her any such thing. I took the second pen. The second was a standard office ballpoint pen, black, unbranded, filled with permanent ink. I picked up the document, which was the decoy will. "No," I said, a feigned look of confusion. "I prefer to use one of my own pens. It's a Vance family tradition." Ivy sighed, annoyed by my coquetry, but she backed down. I picked up a third document. Hours earlier, I had taken the official, legal will, the document that bequeathed everything to the Willowbrook Foundation, and placed it in the pile, just beneath the decoy will. When I took the standard pen, the permanent ink pen, I shifted the documents so that Ivy and Beatrice believed I was signing the decoy. But I took the official will, the one for the Willowbrook Foundation, and signed with a firm hand. That pen, that ink, was for eternity. Ivy, meanwhile, took the decoy that I had barely touched, slid it under a binder for filing, certain she was in control. She left an hour later, wishing me an emotional recovery that sounded like a cruel joke. She was convinced. Oliver was hers. The money would follow. The silence returned. I looked at the rain. I drank my cold tea. I spent the rest of the day waiting, watching the clock hands. The time needed for the chemical reaction to occur in Ivy's clutch. The heat-sensitive ink on the custody relinquishment document had begun its insidious work. Body heat, the diffuse light in her car, the ambient warmth. The pigments were vanishing. 2 days later, the war began. I was in the library, stroking an old edition of Wuthering Heights, when my phone rang. It was Beatrice, Ivy's lawyer. Her voice was no longer ice, it was acid. "Mr. Vance, we have a problem with the relinquishment. Your signature is unstable. It has become almost invisible. It's ridiculous. We'll have to redo it." "Unstable?" I pretended to be surprised. My goodness! Perhaps I was too light on the pressure. That old pen of Henry's. Ivy was convinced it was an accident, an ink defect, or my senility. She wasn't angry. She was just frustrated. She needed a quick new signature. She would give me the document to sign the following week. She was obsessed with Oliver's custody. The money was secondary, a guarantee. Custody was power. That's why she didn't check the other document. The will. The following week, the real bomb dropped. I was in my study, and I received a call from my own lawyer. He was confused, almost panicked. "Mr. Vance, Ivy filed the will, the one you signed in front of us. She thought she would get the execution and we would proceed to probate. But she found..." He hesitated. "She found a second document, sir." The second document was not the one she had in her possession. She had filed the decoy will, the will that left everything to Oliver but had no signature. She had taken the decoy. The original, the one I had signed with the permanent ink for the Willowbrook Foundation, had remained in my safe. She screamed fraud. She demanded to see the original I had signed that day. My lawyer, respecting my plan, presented a single legal document. The one that had been in my safe all along, the official will. The official will, bearing my indelible signature, dated the day of the meeting, and duly notarized by her own notary, stipulated that 98% of the Vance fortune went to the Willowbrook Foundation. Ivy realized that I had switched not the pens, but the documents. I signed the custody relinquishment with ephemeral ink. I took the original will that I had drafted, signed it with eternal ink, and immediately slipped it into my safe, letting her believe that this will was the decoy. She took the unsigned decoy, filed it, and understood the horror. She had the custody relinquishment document, but the ink had disappeared. She no longer had power over Oliver. She had the will, but it was empty. She didn't have the money. She came to see me. Broken. Screaming. She threw Henry's ring onto the marble floor. She cried that she would fight. "You can't do this to me, Samuel. He's my son, and it's my right." "No, Ivy," I replied, my voice tired. "It's Henry's right." She collapsed. She didn't understand the elegance of cruelty. She thought it was about millions. She thought revenge was a dish best served hot. She eventually took Oliver. She moved him far away from Seattle. I understood. She wanted him to become the heir to another fortune, another plan. I returned to my silence, my solitude on the 40th floor. Oliver calls me occasionally, quick calls, where he talks about parks. I talk to him about the rain, the light, everything his father loved. Eleanor's foundation took off. They found a new therapy. Henry would have been proud. Today the sun is faintly shining for the first time in months. I have the latest bank statement in front of me. The funds have been transferred. There is, however, one last thing Ivy never knew. The final touch to my revenge. The part I told no one. When I signed the custody relinquishment document, the ephemeral document, there was a subtle clause buried beneath the legal terms. A clause I had added myself, which Ivy hadn't read. A clause stating that if the Vance inheritance was diverted to a charitable foundation within 6 months of the signing, any attempt at legal guardianship of the grandson by the widow would be considered an attempt at extortion and would revoke any future visitation rights. Ivy gave up my visits for Oliver. But she didn't give up her own. My smile was not a smile of victory when I signed. It was a smile of grief. I hadn't sought to keep Oliver for myself. I sought to protect him. But by protecting him from the money, I condemned him to the only thing she could offer him. The document she took, the one whose life faded with the heat. It wasn't the custody relinquishment. It was the preliminary version of my will that gave her everything. Had she only been patient. I signed the custody relinquishment with a Chinese ink fountain pen. It's the only document she kept. What I left her was neither power nor money. I left her custody, but the fortune was sealed with Eleanor. My son, Henry, had a rule. You can't buy love, but you can make it the only thing you have left. She left with Oliver. She is free. She thinks she has custody. But what I never revealed to Ivy, what she won't know until next spring, when she wants to enroll Oliver in her new school, and needs his father's inheritance deed to prove the address, is that the day Henry died, he had already signed, on my advice, a transfer of guardianship in case of an accident. Not to Ivy, to his godmother, a discreet woman in Edinburgh. The document I signed, with the evaporating ink, was a simple receipt of her last visit. The document she thought sealed my defeat was the relinquishment of my guardianship. But my guardianship was already secondary. Oliver is on his way to Scotland. She doesn't know it yet. I sacrificed my relationship with him to save his soul. He will never forgive me. But I won the war. I saved my son's soul. The truth is here, now, cold and final. If you understood what it means to sacrifice warmth for justice, then you understand loneliness. If this story still echoes in you, then you are exactly the kind of soul who understands the price of silence. Stay. Subscribe. There's always another confession waiting for its time.